What is up, world? It's your boy Tanh, and you are listening to the Wonton Wealth Podcast. Here, I'm going to unravel anything and everything commercial real estate related. And more importantly, we're going to add abundant value. So if you're ready, buckle up your eardrums. Welcome back, people. Last week, we got into a little bit of the due diligence process. Once you sign the PSA, what you should do immediately after that step. In a sense, after you sign the PSA, you're in your due diligence period. One pro tip or value tip that I have for you guys is making sure that within your PSAs, you mention that the due diligence period starts when you have acquired all of the requested documents. Once again, because a lot of times sellers will drag their feet. So you don't want them wasting all of your DD time when you actually could use that time to dig deep within the property. So today we are going to be talking about part 2 of the due diligence stage. It's going to be lengthy because due diligence itself is super lengthy, so bear with me. We're going to go through some of the steps here after you get the first steps done, which are once again, the estoppels and getting your escrow timeline figured out. After that, we're going to be looking at the first 45 to 60 days within the due diligence period. We're going to be digging deeper. So grab your shovel. Within your PSA, you're probably going to have a clause in there that tells you to deposit X amount of dollars of earnest money into escrow. So we want to get that taken care of almost immediately because you really only have, depending on how you structured it, there's going to be an X amount of days of you having to deposit that earnest money. Usually I shoot for 7 to 14 days, but I like to get this done ahead of time. And sellers are going to want it done ahead of time too to make sure that you are serious about wanting to buy the property. However, one thing that I always negotiate for, no matter the time frame, is using a title company that I've worked with before and or trust. Because if I've worked with them before multiple times, hopefully they like me enough to do business with me again. And so when shit hits the fan, a lot of times they'll have your back. With earnest money, you can either wire it or bring a cashier's check, whatever your preference is there. If you missed your deadline though of bringing in or submitting your earnest money to the title company, your purchase and sale agreement could be voided and you could have lost that sweet ass deal. So make sure you don't miss that timeline. Once again, the due diligence period is where you're going to get to know your property super well. Like in a relationship, it's the getting to know you phase. You're going to be looking at the financials, the inspection, legal shit, title shit, a market analysis, any permits, any approvals. You're going to be looking at the leases. It's going to take down a lot of time. The first thing I always do, or first thing you probably should do, is looking at the financials. Look at the rent roll. Look at the current leases. Look at their start dates, their end dates, if they got any renewals. The most important thing here is figuring out which of your tenants are expiring soon if you have the ability to renew those leases with them. You want to look at some of the historical financials. Take a look at the last 3 years of the P&Ls and even compare that to the current T12 report. You could even look at the Schedule E's, the last 3 years of the Schedule E's from the properties or from the seller's taxes on the property. This will give you a good idea of what those numbers look like, the expenses, the income. Within the rent roll, you also want to check for any rent concessions. Are there any rent concessions within the last 12 months, or is there any TI that's been built in that's within the leases that is being amortized in payments? And has there been any capital improvements that the owner have undertook in the past, 3 years or so? You want to know what has been done to the property. If that'll give you a good idea of the age of some of the things that are in the property as well. If there's been a lot of capital improvements within the past 5 years, that's less for you to worry about. You want to take a look at some of the bills too. Look at the utility bills for the last 12 months. all the utilities, water, electric, gas. Look at the real estate bill. Look at their insurance bill. This will help you tighten up your own pro forma. Check out to see if there's any outstanding tenant delinquencies or defaults. What is the collection rate? How many of these tenants are always late on a regular basis? If the property is on a net lease, check out the CAMRECs, the past 2 years of CAM reconciliations, seeing if, how their management has been or how their accounting practices are. Has there been any discrepancies there? Are they overpaying the tenants? Are they underpaying the tenants? So that was all pretty much the financial side. You also want to look at the operational side of the property. So look to see if there's any amendments with the leases. What do those amendments say? Are there changes in how the tenant relationship with the landlord changes, or are they more responsible for X, Y, and Z? Because that's going to change how you are going to operate the business. Now, you also want to see if there's any renewals that have been signed. Are tenants exercising their option to renew on a regular basis? That probably means they like the space, or they like the landlord, or they have great success here. That will probably tell you that they will want to renew again. Get a list of all the personal property that's within the property. Sometimes you're going to have restaurants that are there. The materials and the inventory is probably something that's owned by the building, which means you as the owner are privy to that. And most importantly, you want to get a copy of the service contracts that are involved with the property. You also want to get a copy of the management contract if there's any type of management within the property, so as to evaluate how you yourself are going to manage the property. Are you going to consider continuing to use the services that are within the contract, or change to another service? Maybe that's a way to add value. Maybe that's a way that you can drop the expenses. Same thing with the insurance. Are they overpaying for some type of policy? Can you get a cheaper insurance policy? In today's world, probably not, because insurance has pretty much gone way up. Also check to see if there's any pending litigation that's against the property. Maybe it'll be a lien that's on the property. Or check for a summary of insurance losses for the last 3 years. Maybe that will uncover some CapEx items that were taken care of, or if there's any current issues that are at hand. And another list of items that you want to look at are physical, so it pertains to the building itself. You're going to want to look at building site plans, surveys, seismic reports if you're in an area that is prone to earthquakes, an engineering report if they have one, maybe a statement of structural alterations that the seller has done, any environmental reports, your phase 1, phase 2, pest inspection, radon, mold abatement, zoning compliance reports, COs or certificates of occupancies, or any liens that are pertaining to the property. And lastly, probably the most important, are the warranties that are on the mechanicals, like the roof and the HVAC. So those are some of the items that you want to look for and ask the seller for when you're doing your due diligence, in order to review them in further detail. This itself will give you a pretty granular picture of what the property looks like and what it needs, if at all anything. Now, within the due diligence process, after reviewing all these items, I'd like to check the floodplain. I go to FEMA's website and I'll look at if this area is affected by floods, because the importance item here is that it's going to affect your insurance and whether or not you can add additional construction, because it's going to change construction rules. Plus, in addition, it helps you manage some risk, because if you're in a high floodplain area, if for some odd reason now there's a flood, your property is pretty much fucked. And obviously, you don't want that. You always want to check the auditor's website. Look at the property's valuation details. Look at the transfer history. Look at the ownership details. So this will give you an idea of how long the owners held it, and if the true owner is who is actually selling it to you. Sometimes you might want to call the cops. Talk to the local police about the safety levels of the current area and any relevant details that they're able to give you. Along those same lines, contact the fire department. See if the building's fire safety setup is correct, or if there's been a lot of issues with them historically. Because if they're not, they can actually make your life a living hell. Look at the city's website. Look for any incoming information on planning and development or upcoming projects. Understand what you can do with the property and any potential issues that are currently there. Along those same lines, contact the city. Discuss any plans you have with the city council and look at how their team is cooperating. When they make decisions, is everyone cohesive, or are they kind of like fighting against each other, or are they just bitching at each other the whole time, or are they like, yeah, man, you're cool, like we'll do this, we'll do that, whatever. Figure out the dynamic, because at the end of the day, if they're cohesive, a lot of times your plans or any of the plans that come up are going to be more easily approved versus a discombobulated group. And while you're on the phone with the city zoning, make sure that, check into the parking situation. You want to make sure that you have adequate parking for your tenants based on their business types, because a lot of times if you're buying something that doesn't have the correct proper parking requirements, they might make your life a living hell as well. And again, once you have them on the phone, ask them about some of the grants that are there. A lot of times these cities have money that are set aside by some government programs that are there to encourage, community development or redevelopment within the community. So some of the things that I'm talking about are the CRA, or the Community Reinvestment Act, or brownfield grants, and there's TIF as well, the tax increment financing programs. So check into those to see if any of those could benefit your project. Next, you want to check for any litigation. You can do this online. You can check for online court records. You can go to the county clerk's office. You can have a title company do a title search for you. Those will give you some better ideas of whether or not there's any current litigation issues with the property. You can also check social media, the cheap, free, easy way to do it. Just do a quick Google search of the city, and get some details on what's going on with the city. You probably find some newsletters, or you can go to the town's website directly to get some newsletter information, or community forums. Facebook's probably going to be a great spot to check out, because there's probably a ton of groups out there in regards to the town or city. Unless it's a super small town or city, then you might run into a wall there. But if it's a mediocre sized town or city, you'll probably see a lot of groups, and you'll probably see a lot of the townies bitching at each other, or just complaining about this, and that, or highlighting the wonderful benefits that are coming in, some developments that are coming in. This will give you a good idea of how the city is, and how it could tailor to your business plan with the property. You never want to buy a property without seeing it in person, so you always want to plan a site visit. When you do plan the site visit, hopefully, if it's local to you, invite all the contractors that you're able to. A roofer, HVAC tech, a GC or a general contractor. And if you're not local, maybe make some connections beforehand. Get some boots on the ground via social media, Google, whatever. Bring as many team members as you can, because these are your experts. They're going to be able to see things that you're not going to be able to see. It's their expertise. They look at this all day, every day. They're going to be way better at it than you are. Trust me. When you go, you're checking out the property itself, but you also want to check out the neighborhood. Check out some of the comps. Take detailed notes and lots of pictures in order to remember all the specifics, right? You want to gather as much info as you can, because if you're going to be the potential owner, you're going to want to know this thing inside and out. You want to look at the big ticket items, the parking lot, the landscaping, the roof, the exterior conditions. Is it dog shit? Is it pretty nice? Do you have to pour a lot of money into it? Signage, pylon signs. Those things are fucking expensive. After that, you can bring it back to your own underwriting assumptions, and you can adjust your renovation budget as necessary. And when you get to the property, when you talk to the owner or the broker or the property manager, whoever the fuck, you want to make sure you ask them a few questions. Questions like, how long has the current owner owned the property? Current and the lowest occupancy rates. Who's been managing this property? Have you been the sole manager? Or has this team been the sole manager, or has those managers changed? If they've changed, why? Why did they change? Did they suck? Has there been any activity on the leasing side? If it's vacant, if there are some vacancies, right? Who's marketing the property right now for lease? How many people are calling in? Do you have a lot of showings? Look at the area traffic, look at the demographics. Are there any recent repairs on the roof, on the parking lot, on the HVAC system, on the signs? What deferred maintenance are there? Do you have any bad debts? What's the crime like in the area? And who's your primary competitor? Are you having issues leasing out this space? Is this type of square footage perfect for this area? Do you get more mom and pop inquiries, or do you get more tenants that are on the national side? One of my favorite questions to ask is like, okay, if I gave you 150 grand right now, what would you do immediately to the property? And hopefully the answer is nothing, but sometimes they'll probably pinpoint a couple things that they think need the most attention. After you're done with the property, I'd probably take a tour around the neighborhood, check out the neighborhood, sit down on a bench for a little bit, watch people, do some people watching. Don't stalk them, just people watch. You'll get a really good idea of how the neighborhood actually is. If there are for lease signs in the area, call the for lease signs. Get some more detail on the area. You could shadow shop and pretend you're a tenant looking to rent some space, however much space that they have. Ask the property owners for any space layouts, any reports that they have. You want to get your eyes on it. Market survey reports, right? Rent comps, anything. And speaking of rent comps, you're probably going to want to ask your broker to provide you a rent comp analysis, right? Or you can do it yourself. And by yourself, if you don't have the online tools to do it, what you can do is you can just do an extensive online research, right? Look at what people are renting shit out for. What the current space is, what dollar per square foot they're renting it for, how long has it been vacant, etc., right? And while you're in the area, what you can also do, like I said, is shadow shop or secret shop, whatever the hell you want to call it. You could, once you're talking to people on these for lease signs, or when you're driving the area and you see a vacancy and people are there, you can, talk to them just to figure out all this information about the area. And I know the person you talk to, when you ask them all these questions, are probably only going to be able to give you X amount of information to an extent. You're going to have to do a lot of shit on your own, like the comp analysis. You're going to want to look at the competition yourself. Look around, drive around. Once you're driving around the area, figure out, if there are other properties that are similar to yours. Hopefully you've done a lot of this research already when you were on your computer, and now you're actually doing the physical walkthrough of the competition and checking out the property. You want to make sure that you identify all of your competition when you take this property over, because at the end of the day, they could make your life shitty. If they have a better product, all the potential tenants are going to go to them, leaving you out in the desert to dry. And hopefully you have a super cool broker who can actually give you a ton of information. What you also want to figure out is, the vacancy in the area, the rent per square foot comparison, a true property comparison, how your property squares up with all the other properties within X amount of miles. How does your location compare to the competitors or other retail or industrial properties or office properties, whatever? And what are properties currently selling for within the area? Does it match up with the offer that you've given the owners or the sellers currently? See if they can also get you a traffic count of the area. With retail and office spaces, it's pretty important that there's some type of traffic count to drive some of the customers there. You could also check for new construction in the area. Are there a lot of development, a lot of construction people in the area? Look at your competitors. Once again, how is the marketing that they're doing? How is the marketing on the current property in question that you're looking at? Is it subpar? Are they firing on all cylinders? Could you do anything about it, right? To go into more detail, once you got all the financial documents that you've had, you can get even more granular. You can do a financial audit, with all the documents that you've gotten and spreadsheets that you've gotten over the past 2-3 years or whatever. You can hire somebody to actually audit all of these documents for you. A consultant firm would be, or a real estate consultant firm would probably be the best place to visit for something like this. It's probably going to cost you a couple $1,000, or your property management company can do this depending on your relationship with them. So when you do a financial document audit, you want to watch out for a few things. You want to watch out for inflated leases. You want to make sure that if it's an owner occupant, they're not paying inflated market rents in order to make the building look more attractive. When you get to T12, you want to compare the gross annual income with the annualized gross rents from the current rent roll. If there are any discrepancies, or you see that some things are just kind of off or whatever, make sure you ask the seller on that. If you even have more discrepancies after you kind of double check everything, ask for a cash ledger from the seller's accounting software or bank statements to make sure that these numbers match up. You want to get as detailed as you can in the due diligence phase when it comes to the finances, right? The due diligence period itself is a super lengthy process, and hopefully I've given you a little bit of a summary there. Within my book, it goes into a little bit more detail on the checklist items and whatnot, but hopefully this was a good summary for you guys. And once again, make sure you are meticulous with it. Do not skip any steps within the due diligence phase. That will help ensure that you're taking down a solid investment that you understand thoroughly. That's all I got for today. I will see you guys again next week. And that's a wrap. If you've made it this far, that means you've listened to the entire episode, so thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening from. And if you've learned something or found it useful, share it with one of your homies. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm pretty active on IG. My handle is pro_TANH. Reach out, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, or what you want to hear about in the future. I'm here to tailor this to you. Until next time.